The gang thought Sheik was an easy target, until her canine German Shepherd left them terrified. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. Sarah never thought danger would find her. She was just heading home like any other night, her footsteps echoing in the empty streets. But something felt off. A rustling sound. A shadow moving in the corner of her vision. The unsettling feeling of being watched. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Multiple. Getting closer. Her breath hitched. She wasn't a fighter. She had no weapon. No way to defend herself. Or so they thought. Because lurking in the darkness, waiting, watching, was something far more terrifying than they could ever imagine. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who loves inspiring stories and help us spread messages of courage and hope. Sarah tightened her coat around her body as the cold night air brushed against her skin. The streets were nearly deserted, just the occasional flicker of a street lamp casting long shadows along the sidewalk. She had worked a double shift at the diner and was exhausted, her legs aching with every step. All she wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and collapse into bed. She took the same route every night, past the closed shops, through the quiet neighborhood, and down the alley that cut 5 minutes off her walk. It wasn't the safest path, but she had never had trouble before. Tonight, though, something felt different. At first, she ignored it. The strange prickling at the back of her neck, the sensation of being watched. It was probably nothing, just paranoia from being out alone at this hour. But then she heard it. Footsteps. Not hers. Her heart pounded in her chest as she glanced over her shoulder. The alley was empty. Just a row of dumpsters, a flickering streetlight, and silence. Yet the feeling wouldn't leave her. She quickened her pace, gripping her purse strap tightly. Another sound. Closer. Sarah's breath hitched. She wasn't imagining it. She turned a corner, stepping into the dimly lit street ahead. That's when she saw them. 4 men, leaning against the wall, waiting. Their faces were partially hidden by hoodies, their postures too casual, too expectant. She froze. One of them, a tall man with a scar running down his jaw, pushed off the wall and took a step toward her. "You're out late," he said, his voice low, almost amused. Sarah's pulse raced. She glanced around. No one. The diner was 5 blocks back. Her apartment was still too far. There was no one to call for help. She took a step back. Another man chuckled. "Don't run," he said. "We just want to talk." Her mind screamed at her to move, to run, but her feet felt glued to the pavement. Then, a sound broke through the tense silence. A low, guttural growl. Deep. Threatening. Close. The men stiffened. Sarah's breath hitched. From the shadows behind her, something moved. A figure, sleek and powerful, stepping forward with slow, deliberate steps. Rex. Her German Shepherd. Her protector. The streetlight caught his golden brown fur. His ears perked forward. Eyes locked on the men ahead. His lips curled slightly, revealing sharp white teeth. Another growl rumbled from his chest, a silent warning. Sarah had never been so relieved in her life. One of the men took a cautious step back. "What the hell?" he muttered. The one with the scar didn't move. He narrowed his eyes. "It's just a dog." Rex took another step forward, muscles tense, tail straight. He wasn't just a dog. He was trained. A former canine, retired, but still deadly when needed. Sarah slowly moved, placing her hand on Rex's back. "You should leave," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. The scarred man smirked, but there was something uneasy in his eyes now. "Or what?" Rex let out a sharp, sudden bark. A command, a warning, a promise. The men flinched. Then Rex lunged. Not at them, but just enough to send a clear message. His powerful frame tensed as he barked again, the sound echoing off the alley walls. That was all it took. One of the men cursed under his breath. "Forget this," he muttered, backing away. Another followed. The scarred man hesitated, his jaw tightening, before finally stepping back. "Crazy woman," he spat, before turning and disappearing into the night. Sarah exhaled a shaky breath, her legs weak beneath her. Rex stood firm, watching them go, his body still tense, ears alert. Only when the alley was silent again did he finally relax, looking up at Sarah with those deep, intelligent eyes. She dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms around his thick fur. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You saved me." Rex let out a small huff, as if to say, "Of course I did." She wasn't alone, and as long as Rex was by her side, she never would be. The adrenaline was still pumping through Sarah's veins as she clung to Rex. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on her, her legs trembling beneath her. She wasn't sure how long she stayed there, kneeling on the cold pavement, her fingers buried in Rex's thick fur. Her heart pounded in her ears, drowning out the distant hum of the city. Rex stood tall beside her, his ears still perked, his sharp eyes scanning the alley. He hadn't let his guard down yet. He was waiting, listening, for any sign that the men might return. Sarah forced herself to take a deep breath. She had to move. Staying here wasn't safe. "Come on, boy," she whispered, pushing herself up. Her knees wobbled, but she steadied herself. Rex moved with her, never straying too far. His body was tense, muscles coiled like a spring, ready to react at the slightest hint of danger. Sarah glanced down the alley, her pulse still hammering. The men were gone, but the fear still clung to her skin. Had they really given up that easily? She didn't want to stick around to find out. She took a step forward, then another, quickening her pace toward home. Rex stayed by her side, his presence a silent shield between her and the world. Her apartment wasn't far, just a few more blocks. But every shadow, every flickering street lamp, made her uneasy. Her mind replayed the scene over and over. Their voices, the way they moved toward her, the way fear had locked her in place. She clenched her fists. Never again. Turning the last corner, she spotted the familiar building up ahead. Relief flooded her chest. She reached her door, fumbling with her keys. Her hands were shaking, her breath still uneven. Rex stood close, his head turning, scanning the empty street one last time before she pushed the door open. Once inside, she locked it. Deadbolt, chain, everything. Then she sank against it, exhaling deeply. Rex sat in front of her, watching. His tail swished slightly, his expression calm now, as if asking, "Are you okay?" Sarah let out a small, shaky laugh. "You scared them off like a damn superhero," she whispered. Rex huffed, his ears twitching. She ran a hand over his head, her fingers tracing the strong line of his jaw. "What would I do without you?" Rex didn't answer, of course. But he didn't need to. His presence was enough. Sarah stood and walked toward the kitchen, filling a bowl with water. Rex lapped it up eagerly, his body finally relaxing. She watched him for a moment, taking in the way his chest rose and fell. He wasn't just a pet. He was family. A retired canine, trained to protect, disciplined, sharp. She had adopted him, not knowing just how much she would need him, and tonight had proven that more than ever. She swallowed hard, the fear still lingering in her chest. What if Rex hadn't been there? The thought made her stomach turn. She turned away, rubbing her arms. No, she wouldn't let her mind go there. Instead, she looked at Rex and smiled, a real smile this time. "Come on," she said softly, motioning toward the couch. "You deserve the best spot tonight." Rex padded over and curled up beside her, pressing his warm body against her leg. His eyes remained alert, but there was an ease to his breathing now. Sarah exhaled and leaned her head back, letting the weight of the night slip away. She wasn't alone, and as long as Rex was by her side, she never would be. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She tried, closing her eyes, slowing her breathing, but every time she drifted near sleep, the memories came rushing back. The alley, the voices, the footsteps creeping closer. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the night pressing on her chest. Every sound outside made her jump. A car passing, a door closing, the wind against the window. Rex lay at the foot of her bed, his body curled, but his ears alert, listening, watching, protecting. She turned onto her side, facing him. "Do you ever sleep?" she whispered. Rex opened one eye, his tail giving a small thump against the blankets. Then he yawned and stretched, as if to say, "Only when you do." Sarah smiled faintly. She reached out, letting her fingers brush against his fur. It was comforting, grounding. "You saved me," she murmured. "I don't think I've even processed that yet." Rex didn't move, just let her stroke his fur. The steady rhythm of it slowed her racing heart, but one question kept circling in her mind. Would they come back? She swallowed hard. They had run when Rex lunged, but men like that didn't take embarrassment lightly. What if they wanted revenge? What if next time, Rex wasn't enough? Her grip on his fur tightened. She couldn't live in fear. The thought of being afraid to walk down her own street, of feeling trapped in her own home, it made her chest tighten. She wasn't the same scared girl she had been when she adopted Rex. She had come too far for that. And if they thought she was weak, they were wrong. She forced herself to sit up. The clock read 4:27 a.m., and a soft blue light seeped through the window. Rex lifted his head, sensing her shift. Sarah ran a hand over her face. "I need to do something." She climbed out of bed, pulling on a hoodie and slipping her feet into sneakers. Rex followed her, alert now. She grabbed his leash, but didn't attach it. He never needed it. She unlocked the door, pausing for a second before stepping outside. The street was still, quiet, too early for most people to be awake. She took a deep breath, the cold morning air filling her lungs. Rex stood at her side, ears perked, waiting. Sarah took a step forward, then another. She walked the same route as the night before, past the closed shops, the quiet homes, the flickering streetlights. Her muscles were tense, expecting something to jump out from the shadows. But nothing happened. The world was just as it had always been. She reached the alley, the place where it had happened. Her chest tightened, but she didn't stop. She stepped forward, looking around. Empty. No signs of them. No proof that anything had ever happened at all. She exhaled. Rex stayed close, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air. Sarah swallowed down her fear. This was her neighborhood, her home, and she wasn't going to live in fear because of a few thugs who thought they could intimidate her. She turned to Rex, forcing a small smile. "Looks like they learned their lesson." Rex blinked at her, his tail giving a slow wag. She gave him a scratch behind the ears. "Good boy." They walked back home, step by step, reclaiming what had been taken from her the night before. She wasn't weak, she wasn't alone. And with Rex by her side, she never would be. The morning sun had barely risen when Sarah stepped back into her apartment. The walk had cleared her mind, but the weight of what had happened still lingered. She locked the door behind her, securing the deadbolt, then let out a slow breath. Rex padded in beside her, his sharp eyes scanning the room as if making sure they were truly safe. He had always been that way. Aware, protective, ready. Sarah leaned against the door, closing her eyes for a moment. She had faced her fear, walked the same path, stood in the same alley where it all happened, but she knew this wasn't over. What if they came back? Her stomach twisted at the thought. The men had fled when Rex lunged. But would that be enough to stop them forever? She had no answer. Instead of dwelling on it, she walked into the kitchen and poured a bowl of food for Rex. He sniffed it, then looked up at her. She smiled faintly. "Go ahead. You earned it." He hesitated, watching her for a second longer before finally digging in. Sarah grabbed her phone from the counter. She needed to do something, needed to be prepared in case this ever happened again. She scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she was looking for. Daniel Carter, ex-cop, K9 handler, an old friend. She hadn't spoken to him in a while, but if anyone could help her figure out how to protect herself, it was him. She tapped the call button. After 3 rings, a groggy voice answered. "Sarah." She let out a breath. "Hey, Danny. Sorry for calling so early." There was a pause. "Everything okay?" She hesitated. "Not really." His tone sharpened. "What happened?" Sarah glanced at Rex, who had finished eating and was now sitting beside her, ears perked. "I was followed last night," she admitted. "Cornered by a gang. 4 of them." Silence. Then Daniel cursed under his breath. "Are you hurt?" "No." She reached down, running her fingers through Rex's fur. "Because of him?" Daniel exhaled, and she could hear the tension in his voice. "They just let you go?" She hesitated. "Rex made sure they did." Silence again. Then a slow, approving chuckle. "That dog always was a damn warrior." Sarah smiled for the first time that morning. "Yeah. But Danny, I don't think this is over. What if they come back?" His voice turned serious. "They might." The knot in her stomach tightened. "I'll come by," he said. "We'll go over some things. Self-defense, security, ways to make sure you're ready if they try again." Relief flooded her chest. "Thank you." "Of course," he said. "And Sarah?" "Yeah." "Give Rex a treat for me. He earned it." She laughed softly. "I will." When she hung up, she felt lighter. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't alone. She crouched down, looking into Rex's intelligent brown eyes. "Looks like we've got some training ahead of us, buddy." Rex wagged his tail, ready. Sarah smiled. The fear was still there, but now, so was something stronger. Determination. The next few days passed in a blur. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that clung to her no matter how many times she reassured herself. The men who had cornered her, their threatening words, the fear that had gripped her, those memories kept replaying in her mind. But the difference now was that Rex was always by her side, watching over her. His protective presence a constant reminder that she wasn't as defenseless as she once thought. It had been 2 days since she had called Daniel, and this morning, he showed up as promised. His familiar face brought a sense of comfort, but his serious demeanor reminded her that this wasn't something to take lightly. "Hey," he greeted her, giving Rex a quick scratch behind the ears before turning to her. "You good?" Sarah gave a small nod, but her unease was clear. "I'm managing. But I'm not going to lie, Danny, I'm still rattled. I keep thinking, what if they come back? What if I'm not ready next time?" Daniel's eyes softened with understanding, but there was no hesitation in his response. "You've got this. We're going to go over everything. How to stay alert, how to protect yourself, and most importantly, how to use Rex the way he's trained to protect you." She felt a surge of relief. She wasn't alone in this. They spent the next few hours going over various scenarios. What to do if she was approached again, how to stay calm, where to run if necessary. Daniel showed her basic self-defense moves, things she could do if she was caught off guard, but most of their focus was on Rex. The bond between Sarah and Rex had always been strong, but now it felt like they were truly partners. Rex's instincts were sharp. He had been trained to detect threats, to respond before anyone could think. "Rex is a weapon, Sarah." Daniel explained as they practiced a few drills with him. "But he's not just an attack dog. He knows when to hold back, when to protect you without risking harm. If you're ever in a position where you need him to make a move, you don't hesitate. Trust him." Sarah nodded, feeling a strange mix of gratitude and power. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she had control over the situation. With Rex at her side, she wasn't just a victim waiting to happen. She was prepared. As the afternoon passed, Daniel left, but not before giving her a final piece of advice. Keep Rex close, and if anything ever happens again, don't think twice. You protect yourself, you protect him, and you call me. Sarah hugged him tightly before he left, thanking him again for his help. But as the door clicked shut, her mind didn't settle. There was something about the way he said it, that hint of concern in his voice, that made her feel like she was only scratching the surface of the danger that could be out there. She wasn't naive enough to believe that the gang would just forget about her. They'd been humiliated when Rex chased them off, and some people didn't take rejection easily. As evening fell, Sarah sat on the couch, Rex lying at her feet, his head resting on her lap. She absent-mindedly stroked his fur, lost in thought. Was this really over, or was she just waiting for the next storm to hit? Suddenly, she heard a noise outside. A soft scuffling sound, then a car door closing. Her heart skipped a beat. Rex's head shot up, ears pricked, eyes alert. He stood up, positioning himself in front of Sarah, blocking her from the door. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached for her phone, ready to dial Daniel, ready to call for help. But Rex didn't wait. He moved with precision, his large frame filling the doorway. The growl that rumbled in his chest was deep, primal. It echoed through the room. Sarah's mind raced. Who was outside? What were they doing here? And then she saw it. A shadow moving past the window. But it wasn't a gang member. It was a neighbor walking their dog. The tension in Sarah's body drained away in an instant. She laughed softly, looking down at Rex. "You sure know how to scare me, don't you, boy?" Rex just gave a small whine, his body slowly relaxing as the footsteps passed. He was still watching, still on alert, but the immediate threat had passed. Sarah let out a deep breath, sinking back into the couch. It wasn't over yet. But for tonight, at least, she was safe. And as long as Rex was by her side, she knew she'd never be alone again. That night, Sarah kept her phone within reach and Rex closer than ever. The scare with the neighbor had been nothing, but it reminded her of one truth she couldn't ignore. She wasn't safe yet. She tossed and turned in bed, every creak in the old apartment sending her heart racing. Rex lay at the foot of her bed, as he always did, his ears flicking at every sound. He was resting, but not truly sleeping. He was waiting, watching. Sarah hated this feeling, the feeling of being hunted. She needed to move on, to reclaim her sense of normalcy, but deep down, she knew something wasn't right. At some point, exhaustion overtook her. Her body gave in, and she slipped into sleep. Then came the noise, a sharp bang, a crash, the unmistakable sound of glass breaking. Sarah's eyes snapped open. For a second, she thought she was dreaming. But then she saw Rex, already standing, already growling. It was real. Her blood ran cold. Someone was inside. She barely had time to think before Rex launched off the bed and sprinted toward the sound. Sarah bolted upright, heart pounding. Her mind screamed at her to do something, but fear held her frozen for half a second too long. Then she heard it. Rex barking, loud, vicious, dangerous. Someone cursed. Sarah grabbed her phone with trembling hands and dialed Daniel. It rang once, twice. Then a voice, not Daniel's. "You shouldn't have messed with us, lady." Her stomach dropped. She recognized that voice. The gang. Sarah could barely breathe, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Then came a blood-curdling scream. Not hers, one of them. Rex had attacked. She ran toward the noise, skidding into the hallway. Two men, one scrambling back toward the broken window, another on the ground, and Rex standing over him, teeth bared, growling so low it rattled her bones. The man on the floor wasn't moving. He clutched his arm, breathing heavily, his face twisted in pain. Blood dripped onto the floor. Sarah's hands shook, but her voice was steady. Get out. The other man didn't need convincing. He grabbed his injured friend and hauled him up, both of them staggering toward the window. Rex didn't move. He stood his ground, muscles tense, his gaze never leaving them. The one with the bleeding arm glared at Sarah. This isn't over, Sarah clenched her jaw. Yes, it is. The man cursed under his breath before disappearing through the window. For several long seconds, Sarah stood frozen, her breath coming in short gasps. Then she looked at Rex. His fur was bristled, his chest heaving. His eyes met hers, sharp, clear, focused. He had protected her. Again. Sarah's legs felt weak. She sank to the floor, reaching for him. Good boy, she whispered, voice shaking. You're my hero. Rex huffed, lowering his head to her lap, his tail giving one slow wag. She closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against his. The fear, the panic, the doubt, it was still there. But beneath it, there was strength. And as sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer, she knew one thing for certain. This was the last time anyone would ever think she was an easy target. By the time the sirens stopped outside her building, Sarah had already pulled herself together. She stood, her legs still shaky, her hands running over Rex's fur for reassurance. He was calm now, but his body was still tense, his ears perked and alert. A sharp knock on the door made her jump. Police! Open up! She rushed to unlock it, and as soon as she did, two uniformed officers stepped inside, their eyes immediately scanning the apartment. Behind them, Daniel entered, his expression unreadable, but his eyes dark with concern. What happened? One of the officers asked, noting the broken window, the drops of blood on the floor. Sarah swallowed hard. They broke in. Daniel's jaw clenched. The same guys. She nodded, feeling her chest tighten. They called first. Told me I shouldn't have messed with them. Then the window shattered. Before I could react, they were unkeyed. The officer scribbled something in his notebook. And then... Sarah exhaled slowly, glancing at Rex. Then Rex handled it. The younger officer's eyebrows raised slightly. Handled it how? Daniel answered for her. She has a retired K9, a trained protector. The older officer gave Rex an appraising look. I take it one of them got a little too close? Sarah nodded. Rex took him down, bit his arm. He wasn't going to stop until they left. The officer jotted something down, then exchanged glances with his partner. Good dog. Sarah let out a small, shaky laugh. Yeah, the best. Daniel stepped closer, his voice quieter. Are you okay? She nodded, but it felt like a lie. I think so. Daniel studied her for a moment, then turned to the officers. What's next? The older Kaip sighed. We'll file a report, get some patrols to circle the area for the next few nights. But if they were dumb enough to come back, they won't be for long. Your dog made sure of that. Sarah looked down at Rex, who sat beside her, chest puffed out proudly, still on alert. The officers took their statements, then left, but Daniel stayed behind. He crossed his arms, his gaze heavy with something she couldn't quite read. They could have had weapons, he said finally. This could have ended differently. Sarah's throat tightened. I know. Daniel sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. You need to think about what happens next. These guys aren't just going to forget this. A knot of fear twisted in her stomach. You think they'll try again? Daniel didn't sugarcoat it. I think men like that don't like to lose. And right now, you embarrass them. Sarah inhaled deeply, trying to steady herself. She refused to live in fear, but she also refused to be reckless. What do I do? Daniel hesitated, then nodded toward Rex. You already have your best defense, but let's make sure you're just as ready as he is. Her eyes widened. You mean? I'll train you, Daniel confirmed. You'll learn how to defend yourself, how to move, how to react. If they ever try again, you won't just have Rex watching your back. You'll be ready too. Sarah felt a slow, burning resolve settle in her chest. No more fear, no more helplessness. She crouched down and met Rex's eyes, running a hand through his thick fur. He had saved her more than once. Now it was time she learned how to stand beside him. When she looked up at Daniel, her voice was steady. Let's do it. The next morning, Sarah met Daniel at a private training facility. He didn't waste time, teaching her how to defend herself, how to react under pressure, how to strike when necessary. Rex watched every move, his sharp eyes never leaving her side. She was no longer just a woman with a protector. She was learning to be a fighter. Days passed, then a week. No sign of the Dang. No threats. Just silence. But Sarah knew better than to be complacent. She kept training, kept walking with confidence, knowing that if they ever returned, she would be ready. Then, one night, it happened. A sound outside her window, a shadow moving in the alley, a warning sign. But this time, Sarah didn't feel fear. She felt something else, prepared. Rex stood at her side, ears perked, muscles tensed. She didn't call for help. She didn't back down. She simply stepped forward, her voice firm. I suggest you leave. The figure hesitated. Then it vanished into the darkness. Sarah exhaled slowly. Maybe they finally understood. Maybe they finally knew the truth. She wasn't prey anymore. And with Rex by her side, she never would be again. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Share it with someone who loves inspiring stories and help us spread messages of courage and hope.